Let's stay with cricket matters, where Cricket South Africa has led the way in creating a fully professional women league, paving the way for female cricketers to focus purely on playing the game like their male counterparts. To give us more insight into what Cricket South Africa is doing is Cricket South Africa's Head of Pathways, Edward Khoza. Mr. Khoza, thank you so much for joining us and welcome to Sports Live. Firstly, when did this journey start for you guys, professionalizing the women's game, that is, and where did you go for reference points?
Thanks, Katie. I think one thing I must say, I owe it to the players that have been there. I think since 2013, we had a roadmap that we wanted to conquer the world. And at that time, we contracted 6 players. And within 6 months, we realized that the 6 players we contracted, actually, there was a gap between them and the non-contracted players. So we had to go back to the board and ask them to say, hang on, we need more contracts here. And luckily, the board of the time, they gave us additional contracts, which we managed in 2014 to contract 14 players. But one thing that I must say, the team was led by Mignon du Preez.
Yeah.
And if you have to look at that, women's sport was not that fancy, especially cricket on itself. And she was a good ambassador for us on and off the field. And she put us actually in a good position from a marketing perspective and positioning the team and making it appealing for young girls to want to play. And then when Danefa Nikek took over, we almost wanted to now win on the field of play, and which was quite astonishing for us. And when you consider the fact that these captains were leading teams. So the performances that these teams were getting on the field of play actually paved way for us. Because in 2013, we said we wanted to end up in a semi-final in 2019 World Cup, which we did. And we said in 2022, we'd like to win the World Cup, but due to COVID, the World Cup was moved to 2023. But unfortunately, we ended up with the Senegalese leading the team into a final, and we came short of that whole aspect. One thing that I must say led us to professionalism was that there's a wider gap between our national team and the domestic players. And if you're intentional, if you want to conquer the world, you have to do something domestically. We need to strengthen our domestic cricket, and this is one of those positive steps that we're taking.
Yeah, point of reference, did you look at other leagues, other nations around the world?
We're very fortunate enough that we always benchmark ourselves against England as well as Australia. And they have leagues, and they also have private leagues as well, and which is something that we're looking forward to establishing in South Africa, which would mean more income for the girls as well. But the most important thing, we realized actually that even though we were running an amateur league, our performances on the field of play were actually motivating us to say, hang on, we're on to something that could probably inspire the nation to the greater heights of what we realized in February in Newlands, when you see a full capacity crowd supporting this team. And then post that whole aspect, we had to take an introspection of where we fell short. And through the assistance of the sports ministry, they wanted to invest as well into us professionalizing the sport, and they assisted CSA in doing that. And we had to also dig deep, because for the first time we're going to have 66 players contracted nationally. We have 6 teams in our national league. There's promotion, relegation. So it's not an easy fit where you find that people need to come in. And for the first time, I must say, I'm proud to say, at least players will have medical aids. They will earn a decent salary, and then at least they will more or less focus in making sure that we can close the gap between them as well as the national side.
I'm gonna go back to that point about what you're doing for them specifically, but I want to go back to what you mentioned about Newlands. During the World Cup, we saw packed Newlands. Do you believe that the women then disprove the myth that a women's sport, or especially women's cricket, does not have the same interest as a men's?
No, definitely. I think when you look at how the team was followed right through, whether they were playing in PE, whether they were in Poland, you could see that people have the appetite for it. But the most amazing thing for me is the younger ones that you see that were coming to the stadium, and post that World Cup, we have a greater interest where people want to take up the sport. Because people are not aware, like at the foundation phase, especially with the KFC mini cricket program, more than 60% are female coaches in that space, coaches that are coaching. And then also we have females as well in that space that are almost 60%. So we're quite fortunate enough that our base is quite big. We just need to ensure that the next levels of schools cricket as well as club cricket boost what we're trying to do with the professionalization of women's cricket in the country.
Does this mean then you have measures in place to also increase high performance centers for women's cricket in the country?
Yeah, we were fortunate enough. The current national players that you see, we've been running a national academy since 2014. and because it was the biggest investment we had to make. So when you see the results on the field of play, it's out of almost 10 years of investment from Cricket South Africa, as well as some of the sponsors that were involved in the process leading up to now. And where we are at this point in time, we have provincial academies, which are already taking up women as well. We also have a gold mine in the Eastern Cape at Forte, where we have a joint venture between ourselves and Border Cricket. And in there we have a female cricketer, Ayabonga Kaka, who's in the national team, comes from that environment. She's graduated with a degree, and the rest is history. She's a world icon at the moment, and those are some of the things that we're looking at. So in the Eastern Cape, we try and make sure that we keep the players focused. There's 1 or 2 players that are knocking on the door as well from that environment.
Yeah, and you speak about having so many female coaches. Are we going to see these female coaches in these domestic? Because obviously we haven't been exposed to them. Now we get to finally see these. I mentioned this because I know Hilton Murray's job is being advertised. They're looking for someone else. I did ask the director of cricket if they're specifically looking for a female. He said not necessarily. But also, are we going to see these female coaches now emerging in terms of like could possibly one day coach the national team?
We're in a very fortunate position, and I think that's one of the things that we were appealing to our members that have these professional teams, because 50% of our teams in the National League are coached by women, suitably qualified so. And the issue which is very vital, they've also been in the recent level 4 coaching course, which is our highest level of coaching qualification. And we made it a stance when we launched the league to say it will be a sad day for South Africa if you found that now we're going professional, that these women are not given the rightful space, because they've earned their stripes and they've looked after the teams that they're coaching. But also one thing that we've made was that 50% of the management team will have to be female. So we have a head coach, we have an assistant coach, we have a strength and conditioning as well as a physiotherapist, which we subsidize our members when we professionalize this league. And our demand is to make sure that we build capacity, and we're asking our members, we said it's mandatory, they have to have at least 50% of the management staff being female.
Yeah, let's speak about, you're talking about like they're going to get things like medical aid, but what other measures are there to ensure that they're taken care of? This is a female sport. There could be the possibility of a player falling pregnant, for example. What happens to her when she does maternity leave and having to come back when that is done?
I think one thing which we're fortunate about as Cricket South Africa is our healthy relationship with SACA, which is the South African Cricketers Association. So in the past we had a MOU, which govern how we professionalize and run professional cricket, that binds us as Cricket South Africa and our members to make sure that the well-being of the players is being well looked after. And for the first time, we're launching a female one, which looks after the national team as well as this league. And the issue which is very vital is, again, to those points, because sometimes we tend to, when we run the men's game and questions have been asked on labor-related matters, I can run into the employment manual of CSA, and then probably those issues will speak to men environment predominantly. And with the female space, contracts are in place, and sometimes you might find a female gets pregnant. It's not a fault in terms of not retaining a contract. We don't want our members to use it, so we need to protect those rights in this environment. So the MOU actually allows us to professionalize and treat these players fairly enough. And then I think at the end of every season, we have what we call the PDP discussion, which is our personal development plan discussions, where we speak about expectations on the player side, from a remuneration perspective, from a cricketing side of things, as well as what we're expecting them to do in the next coming years, in a year or two. And because some of our players, for example, in the national team are contracted for a period of 2 to 3 years. Now with this professional league, for the first time, the players are contracted for 19 months because we're starting in 1 October. And so we're hoping that for the first year, there was not going to be a relegation, because we need to allow the structure to stabilize, and then the relegation will take place in the second year. And we're quite confident. We're going on a roadshow now. We're going to meet these players that are getting these contracts. We're going to have to outline the professionalism and our expectations on them, because the most important thing is all good to launch, but we need to make sure that on the ground we live up to expectations and we are truly professional in what we do.
Yeah, so if I'm hearing it right, you're going to have those conversations with these female players that should something like one of them do fall pregnant, they're not going to just lose their job just because
that is covered in our MOU.
Got you. But final one, what difficulties did you run into creating, professionalizing this league? I know you have the support from the ministry who helped you guys fast track what you guys had planned, but any other difficulties that you ran into?
You know, funny enough is that you're venturing in this environment without any corporate support or anything, and we are appealing for that. But the issue which is very vital, definitely people will ask whether are we making the investment in the rightful space. I always say to them, reflect back on the last 10 years of our national team and tell me whether are we making the right decisions. Because the issue which is very vital, there's always doubting Thomases out there. There are people that are always going to push speed humps. But the pressure is now on these women of today that are being contracted, as well as our national players, to pave way for the next generation, because the players before them, they were amateur and they were not contracted. And I'm hoping that down the line, we will still improve what we're giving to them today.
Well, thank you so much. So it sounds like an exciting venture. We're looking forward to seeing what Cricket South Africa can produce next. We're looking forward to seeing these young girls become the next Proteas. Thank you so much. That is Cricket South Africa's head of pathway, that is Edward Khoza, talking about professionalizing women's cricket in the country, which is already underway, starting in 1st of October, I believe. Correct. That's when we're going to see the first weekend of action as far as a women's domestic league in South Africa is concerned.